Arizona. It's one of America's most colorful states, with stunning red peaks, golden hills, and psychedelic sunsets. It's seen some pretty colorful people, too, from Spanish conquistadors on the hunt for lost cities of gold, to a courageous miner who gave birth to one of the wildest towns in the West. Here in Arizona, brave lawmen once battled legendary outlaws in the streets. And not-so-daring scientists tried to help us reach the final frontier. In the skies over this southwest border state, vigilance is kept 24/7. And a controversial sheriff challenges the limits of cruel and unusual punishment to put the lid on crime. In a city where one convict's confession led to fundamental rights for anyone accused. To soar over Arizona is to discover a landscape of giants, from the largest cacti in North America to awe-inspiring craters, one formed by a falling meteorite, another by a fountain of fire that erupted from below, and a chance to journey deep down into the most epic landscape of them all. This is the Grand Canyon State, Arizona. In the Arizona desert, a strange monument rises from the brush. At first, it looks like a relic of some forgotten civilization or the tomb of a prehistoric king. But a closer look reveals that it was placed here just over 100 years ago and marks the grave of an adventurous 19th century prospector named Ed Schieffelin. Schieffelin arrived in what is now southern Arizona in 1877, hoping to strike it rich. He'd come to see if rumors he'd heard were true. Rumors of silver in the Dragoon Mountains, a dangerous and rocky range where Apache warriors were still battling the U.S. Army for their freedom and killing any white man who dared to enter. But Schieffelin was determined to follow his hunch. For months, he stole into these mountains again and again to search for silver, dodging Apache war parties every step of the way. Others urged him to give up and warned him the only stone he would ever find in the Dragoons would be his own tombstone. So when he finally uncovered the motherlode of silver he was hunting for, he named it the Tombstone Mine. It would make Schieffelin a millionaire and spark the spectacular rise of a nearby boomtown that shared the Tombstone name. In just a few short years, the brand new town exploded into one of the West's wildest outposts, with up to 100 saloons and an untold number of houses of ill repute. A mix of silver, greed, liquor, and loose women made Tombstone a volatile, dangerous place. As robbery and murder filled the streets, the town recruited a band of lawmen, including brothers Morgan, Virgil, and Wyatt Earp, and their friend Doc Holliday, to lay down the law. On October 26, 1881, their efforts sparked a shootout so legendary, performers reenacted on a daily basis for tourists who flocked to the scene. Here, in the same Tombstone streets where the actual events unfolded, they show the visitors how Earp and his men ordered a band of outlaws to surrender their guns, and how the outlaws refused. A standoff that finally erupted in a hail of bullets, now famous as the gunfight at the OK Corral. By the time the smoke cleared, 30 rounds had been fired. 3 of the outlaws were dead, and Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday were on their way to worldwide fame as two of the West's most dangerous gunslingers. And Tombstone was on its way to a new era of law and order. Symbolized most of all by the stately new courthouse that soon rose in the center of town. By the mid-1880s, Tombstone was said to be the fastest-growing city between St. Louis and San Francisco, with a population estimated at up to 20,000. But that boom went bust when miners hit the water table and the mines began to flood. By the early 1890s, most of them had closed, and this once wild outpost was turning into a quiet desert town. Ed Schifflin, the man who started it all, died in 1897. His last request was to be laid to rest in his prospecting clothes, with his pick and canteen by his side, not far from his original Tombstone mine. By then, he must have seemed like a relic from a bygone age. But it's an age that will never be forgotten, thanks in large part to a uniquely American art form, the Hollywood Western. Columbia Pictures came to Arizona in 1939 to shoot a movie called Arizona. Producers built this copy of Old Tucson to serve as a backdrop for stars William Holden and Jean Arthur. Ingrid Bergman, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, Val Kilmer, Leonardo DiCaprio all followed, striding along these streets in films that kept the legends of Arizona's Wild West days alive. But Arizona's history doesn't start with tales of the Wild West. Long before gunslingers and saloons dotted the horizon, all that travelers here would have seen was a series of landscapes as stunning as any in the American West. From the colorful slopes of its painted desert to giant fields of black lava. It was here that a nearby volcano erupted in the 11th century. Fire shot hundreds of feet into the air, and a cloud of volcanic ash rose 2.5 miles and then settled over 64,000 acres, leaving behind Sunset Crater. Fortunately, most of those living at its base had time to get out of the way. The story of their escape has been passed down through generations, right down to their Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo descendants today. But Arizona has plenty of other surprises too. Like these forests covered with snow that flank the San Francisco peaks outside of Flagstaff. And then there are the dry, rocky hills of southern Arizona's Sonoran Desert, home to North America's largest cacti, the saguaro. There's no better place to set eyes on these prickly giants than here, on protected land east and west of the city of Tucson, the Saguaro National Park. More than 1.5 million saguaro cacti live here. One reason an entire park has been dedicated to protect one species is because this towering plant can grow up to 50 feet tall and is found nowhere else in the world but in this desert. Come spring, saguaros also produce blossoms that are the Arizona state flower. Thousands of years ago, with landscapes like this one, it would have been easy to think that Arizona was just a wild and uninhabited place. But travelers in central Arizona would have found evidence that people also called this desert home, a people called the Sinagua. Little is known about these early Arizonans, but amazingly, one of their dwellings has survived. Wedged in rugged limestone cliffs is an ancient apartment building that's clung to a seemingly impossible perch here for hundreds of years. It's one of the best preserved cliff dwellings in America. When white settlers first set eyes on it, they imagined it had been built by refugee Aztecs, so they named it Montezuma's Castle, after the last Aztec king. But Montezuma had nothing to do with it. Archaeologists say the Sinagua began building this cliff house and others like it in the 11th century, long before Montezuma. For generations, its thick walls sheltered the Sinagua from the sun, while its perch high on the cliffs protected them from their enemies. But by the early 1400s, they were gone. The remarkable structure they left behind shows they knew a thing or two about surviving in the desert. Something that modern-day residents of Phoenix don't have to worry about today, thanks to a mega engineering project that snakes across the land. When dawn breaks over the mountains east of Phoenix, Arizona, it's easy to see why this is called the Valley of the Sun. Arizona's sunrises are some of the most colorful in the world. These psychedelic side effects are not the result of pollution, but caused instead by the desert's exceptionally clean air, which allows the natural spectrum of colors in sunlight to shine through. And in Phoenix, there's no better place to witness this colorful display than from the top of this iconic 2,700-foot peak known as Camelback Mountain, thanks to its camel-like hump. To reach the top requires climbing more than 1,200 feet in just over a mile. But that doesn't stop millions from reaching the summit every year. It's also a perfect spot to take in breathtaking views of one of the 10 largest cities in the nation. But it's a metropolis that hasn't always grown the way city planners intended. Like the time in the 1960s, when city officials set out to build a grand new skyline and ended up giving Phoenix 2 separate downtowns instead. The dream was to create a Manhattan in the desert by expanding the existing downtown to the north and filling it with skyscrapers. Optimistic developers soon began erecting towers in the city's new north end. But the problem was that no one else stepped forward to build on the blocks in between. And so Phoenix ended up with 2 downtowns by mistake. Today, Phoenix looks more like Los Angeles than Manhattan, with sprawling suburbs, great weather, and endless traffic jams. But that doesn't stop many of America's most promising young athletes from flocking here to play ball. As many as 14 Major League Baseball teams come to Central Arizona for spring training each year. The metro area is dotted with training camps and diamonds for the visiting teams, and the Diamondbacks, who already call Phoenix home. But this isn't spring, and this isn't spring training. It's autumn, and this is the Arizona Fall League, an annual series sponsored by Major League Baseball since 1992. Every Major League team drafts 6 promising young players to compete in the AFL each year and sends its scouts, managers, and coaches along to watch, which means these players aren't just here to win games. They're here to win a spot in the major leagues. Some, like AFL alumni Derek Jeter, Jason Giambi, and Albert Pujols before them, will get called back for spring training. Some won't. That's what happened to Michael Jordan, who played in the AFL in 1994 before heading back to the NBA. But many sports fans come to Arizona with an entirely different game in mind. One they play on more than 250 courses that make Metro Phoenix a golfer's paradise. In the early days, the courses here were all made of sand. But in 1913, Phoenix got its first grass golf course. And in this desert state, it takes a lot of water to keep all that grass green, which is why these courses are regulated and only allowed a certain number of acres of grass per hole. Natural water sources in Phoenix may be scarce, but Arizona itself lies on one of the greatest sources of water in the West. Here, on the state's northern border with Utah, there's plenty of water as far as the eye can see, thanks to the Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River. Hailed as an engineering marvel on its completion in 1964, the dam is the 4th highest in the U.S. and required more concrete to build than the Hoover Dam. 4 million cubic yards of it. Behind the dam, Lake Powell holds enough water to meet the needs of 30 million families a year. But Arizona's not allowed to take all this water for itself. In 1922, it and 6 other states agreed to share the water from the Colorado River. And they've been fighting about how to split it up ever since. To claim its share and to get the water from this river to places like Phoenix and Tucson where it's needed took a giant feat of engineering and 2 decades of construction. First, engineers built an intake valve at Lake Havasu on Arizona's western border. Then, they carved a giant, modern-day aqueduct into the land. It snakes east across the Arizona desert and consists of more than 300 miles of open canals, pipelines, and tunnels, carrying precious water from the Colorado River to millions in Phoenix and then south to Tucson. It's called the Central Arizona Project, or CAP. Construction of this water network began in 1973, but it wasn't easy. Tunnels, like this one west of Phoenix, had to be carved right through the mountains. Without the CAP, the development of Phoenix would have hit a wall. Towers like this one on Phoenix's skyline might not exist, and the city's giant population explosion in recent years would have never been possible. But there's a price for Phoenix's ready supply of fresh water. To power the pumps that keep the water in the CAP flowing requires a lot of energy. And most of that energy comes from one facility right here in the state. It's one of the most dramatic sights in Arizona from the air. Sunrise through the belching stacks of the Navajo Generating Station, just outside the town of Page. Nearly 25% of the power from this plant has been purchased by the CAP to keep its aqueducts working and the water running in Phoenix. But this coal-fired plant has been labeled one of the most polluting in the nation, spewing out high levels of nitrogen oxides from its 3 towering 600-foot chimneys. Pollution that nearly blocks the sun and threatens the views of some of America's finest scenery, and the health of those living on the Navajo reservation on which it stands. It's why tribal officials are looking into developing alternative energy sources to help clear the air, including a proposed wind farm. Until that and other cleaner energy sources come online, more than 35% of Arizonans will continue to depend on coal for their power. And so will the colorful lights of one of Arizona's longest-running shows, the Arizona State Fair, a sparkling spectacle with roots that go back to 1884, long before Arizona was even a state. Today, the fair offers visitors everything from livestock exhibitions to concerts to pig races. But it's the rides that pack them in. 1 million or more fun seekers come here every year to let their kids loose in the Moscow Circus, take a terrifying plunge, or grab a relaxing break atop the Ferris wheel to watch the desert sun go down. But even the sight of Phoenix from high above is nothing compared to the experience of standing on the rim of what may well be America's most awe-inspiring natural landmark. "50,000 years ago, one of America's most dramatic landscapes was born. A giant bowl of earth and rock formed by a great cosmic event in the Arizona desert. It happened in the blink of an eye. A meteorite traveling at 26,000 miles per hour passed through the Earth's atmosphere and slammed into the Arizona desert with an impact equivalent to more than 2.5 million tons of TNT, creating an explosion 150 times stronger than an atomic bomb. The meteorite melted on contact, sending a spray of molten metal and pulverized rock for a mile in every direction. But it left behind one of the world's most unique landmarks, a place known today as Meteor Crater. Almost 1 mile across and more than 550 feet deep, it's an eerie reminder of just how vulnerable planet Earth can be. Meteor Crater would have been a familiar sight to Arizona's early people, like the Sinagua. When Spanish and Mexican travelers first set eyes on it, they must have felt like they'd been transported to another world. But the sight of the Meteor Crater was still nothing compared to what else lay ahead in the Arizona desert. In 1821, the land that's now Arizona changed hands when Mexico won its independence from Spain, and Arizona's deserts and mountains became part of Mexico's new northern territories. But by the 1840s, Americans, driven by a philosophy known as manifest destiny, sought to make this land part of the United States. After America won the 1848 U.S.-Mexican War, much of the Southwest, from Texas to California, officially became U.S. territory, including what would later become Arizona. But the Southwest was such a big area that little was known about this new land and what exactly the United States had won. No one knew that it held what would become one of America's greatest treasures. A giant chasm bigger than anything on the North American continent. A place so daunting in scale, no American had yet managed to journey into its depths. A place now known as the Grand Canyon. Today, visitors come to its rim to be thrilled and unnerved. But when early European travelers first stood here, they simply could not comprehend the canyon's enormous scale. A Spanish conquistador named Garcia Lopez de Cardenas was one of the very first travelers to set eyes on the Grand Canyon. When he arrived in 1540, he literally couldn't believe his eyes. He was convinced it had to be much smaller than it looked. But then, he and his men spent 3 days trying to find a way to descend to the Colorado River on the canyon floor. They finally gave up and headed back the way they'd come. And Cardenas declared the canyon impassable. For the next 300 years, the area would only be explored by the Native American tribes that already knew it well, including the Hopi, Havasupai, and Wallapai. But then, in 1857, a U.S. Army lieutenant named Joseph Ives launched an expedition up the Colorado in a steam-powered boat, hoping to be the first to journey by river through the entire canyon. But Ives' attempt floundered when rapids shattered the boat, forcing him and his men to walk back out. Later, Ives compared what he'd seen to the gates of hell and predicted his would be the first and last party of white men to attempt to reach what he called its valueless depths. But a decade later, a Union veteran of the Civil War named John Wesley Powell launched a new expedition. But this time, he and his team would try to travel down the Colorado River instead of up. Powell, a geologist and one of the Smithsonian Institution's first ethnographers, was hoping to gather evidence that could unlock the mysteries of how the canyon was formed. On May 24, 1869, Powell and his 9-man team launched their expedition in Wyoming on a tributary of the Colorado River. By August, the team had finally crossed into what's now Arizona and started their daring attempt to journey through the entire canyon. Soon, steep walls soared more than a mile above them, filling Powell with dread. But on the banks of the river, he found exciting evidence that this forbidding landscape was once home to native cultures that appeared to have flourished along the canyon floor. Here, where the Colorado River meets the Little Colorado, he found walking trails, ruins, pottery fragments, and petroglyphs of these early canyon dwellers. Today, they're known as the ancient Pueblo people. They began making their homes here in the 8th century. For generations, they farmed the river's fertile banks. And no site in the canyon has revealed more about the lives of the ancient Pueblo people than a place known as the Unkar Delta. Researchers now know that nomads and farmers arrived here at this curve in the river as early as the year 700. But they were gone by around 1150, after severe drought finally drove them away, leaving behind one of the canyon's largest and best preserved ancient sites. It's one of more than 4,000 known archaeological sites in the Grand Canyon, though there could be thousands more. Only 5% of the Grand Canyon National Park has been explored for archaeological remains. As Powell and his men worked their way down the river, they also gathered evidence that would help them understand how the Grand Canyon may have been formed, striking the first blows in a scientific quest that continues to this day. While scientists still don't know exactly how the canyon was created, they do know that its story stretches back more than 1.5 billion years, thanks to colorful layers of rock that are now exposed in the canyon's walls. The oldest of these is a black rock known as Vishnu schist. It was created from deposits of volcanic ash, mud, and sand that washed down from ancient mountains. In the hundreds of millions of years that followed, oceans, deserts, and swamps came and went across this part of Arizona, leaving behind more layers of sedimentary rock, so many that they created a giant plateau. Just 250 million years ago, the youngest layer in the canyon's walls was laid down. It's a light-colored stone known as Kaibab limestone. It was only after these deep and colorful rock layers were formed that the Colorado River started carving a giant canyon through the plateau's floor, feeding it with thousands of tributaries that eroded the landscape even more and helped expose the colorful layers below to create this giant chasm, which reaches, in places, 18 miles from rim to rim. It's a process of erosion that continues. A process that's created some of the canyon's greatest landmarks. From towering rock pinnacles near Temple Butte to deep geological scars known as the Hindu Amphitheater, and soaring above, the Tower of Ra. But Powell's now legendary expedition came with a terrible price. For weeks, his men were forced to battle the canyon's rapids in their heavy 19th century wooden boats, fighting to survive with little food, under grueling conditions today's recreational rafters can only imagine. By the end of August, they thought the worst was over. But then, on August 27, 1869, they came to what seemed to be the most terrifying rapids of them all. 3 of Powell's men refused to run them and went off to climb the cliffs in search of another way out. But the river turned out to be much less dangerous than the men had feared. And just a day later, Powell and his remaining team reached the canyon's end, at a site that has since been flooded by Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam. One of the men on the expedition wrote that his only regret was that the missing men weren't still with them. He would soon discover that Native Americans had killed all 3 of them as soon as they'd reached the canyon's rim. 2 years later, Powell made a second expedition down the Colorado River and wrote a best-selling book about his exploits. It was in this book that Powell gave the Grand Canyon its name. For many standing on its rim today, the towering walls, remarkable depths, and sheer scale of the Grand Canyon remain just as awe-inspiring as they were to the travelers who first stumbled onto this spot hundreds of years ago. For New Age spiritual seekers in Arizona, there's a place that even the Grand Canyon can't top. It's called Sedona. Many believe this is the site of a mysterious energy field where the Earth's cosmic power lines meet and create 4 energy vortices. One of them, they say, is centered here at Cathedral Rock. Towering red cliffs, deep green forests, and an electric blue sky make this high mountain valley an undeniably magical place, whether you believe in magic or not. New Agers have been coming here for decades to soak up its unique energy vibes. But they're not the first to find spiritual inspiration in this valley. In 1941, sculptor Marguerite Brunswick Staudy came to Sedona and found what she'd been searching for years. The perfect spot to build her dream, an awe-inspiring modern chapel centered on a giant cross. Staudy had envisioned what she called a spiritual fortress so charged with God that it spurs man's spirit Godward. She knew putting it on this rocky Sedona hillside would give it a head start. The Chapel of the Holy Cross was completed in 1956 and was given an honor award by the American Institute of Architects the following year. Today, this 90-foot-tall chapel draws 3.5 million visitors a year. But there are no church services here. It's now a place of meditation, open to all. A perfect spot for those who believe that it lies at the center of another of Sedona's famous energy vortices. Building a chapel in the Arizona desert is one thing, but building an experiment for space colonization is something else. This is Biosphere 2, a supersized 3-acre terrarium. Originally funded by Texas billionaire Edward P. Bass, its 6,600 panes of glass enclose 7.2 million cubic feet of space, including an artificial rainforest, desert, and tiny ocean, in addition to 3,800 species of animals and plants. When it opened in the early 1990s, it was hailed as one of the world's most impressive scientific undertakings. But it quickly became one of the most notorious, too, as the home of the Biospherians, a team of researchers who were sealed inside for years at a time in this supposedly self-sustaining environment and left to fend for themselves. Their mission was to use their world to develop new technologies that might help humans survive on the Moon and Mars. They vowed they would grow all the food they needed, recycle their water, air, and waste, and live without supplies from outside. But reports soon surfaced that the Biospherians weren't staying true to their word. Stories that they were actually surviving on pre-packaged food they had hidden inside, secretly replenishing their oxygen from outside, and using CO2 scrubbers to prevent the buildup of dangerous gases. The reports set off a scientific scandal. Though it was rumors about what members of the mixed-gender team were doing after work that really caught the world's imagination. Rumors seemingly verified when 2 of the team members got married almost as soon as they got out. What happened in between might have been perfect for reality TV. Unfortunately, the gossip and scandal ended up overshadowing the serious research being done here, and even helped bring it to an end. Today, Biosphere 2 is still trying to live down its soap opera past and live up to its founders' scientific intentions. Its reputation got a boost when it was taken over in the mid-90s by Columbia University. And in 2011, the University of Arizona started using it for cutting-edge research. The move made it part of a respected institution, which is centered at this sprawling campus in nearby Tucson, that was founded in 1881, 31 years before Arizona was even a state. Today, it's more than 39,000 students follow in the footsteps of past graduates, such as Senator Barry Goldwater, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, journalist Geraldo Rivera, and reality diva Kourtney Kardashian, and help keep the university's traditions alive. Like making sure that the huge mountaintop A that looks out over Tucson is kept freshly painted. Heading over to McHale Memorial Center to cheer on the U of A Wildcat basketball team, owner of the nation's 3rd highest winning percentage since 1997, and crowding into Arizona Stadium to root for the football Wildcats, a team that has carved out its own stellar record since the game was first played on campus in 1899. The youthful energy that U of A students bring to Tucson helps to give this city an up-to-date vibe. But parts of Tucson itself look much as they have since the 19th century, with adobe-style buildings from an age when this part of Arizona still belonged to Mexico. Long before walls of steel divided the desert, and an array of high-tech gadgetry started keeping an eye on America's southern border. Every day, fleets of truckers roll out onto U.S. Interstate 10 in southern Arizona and race across the state's sun-baked desert to deliver the precious cargo that keeps America's 21st century economy on track. But when these trucks head south of Phoenix to Tucson, they drive on land that was originally supposed to be part of Mexico. That's because when the U.S. acquired most of present-day Arizona after the 1848 U.S.-Mexican War, it didn't get a big piece of southern Arizona, including the city of Tucson, which still belonged to Mexico. But after the war, the U.S. wanted even more land to build a new southern transcontinental railroad through Arizona to California. So in 1853, on the heels of the war, a U.S. envoy, James Gadsden, negotiated a deal with Mexico for the U.S. to buy a 30 million acre parcel on the southern borders of present-day Arizona and New Mexico. A piece of land that would be called the Gadsden Purchase. Mexico agreed to give it up for just over 30 cents an acre. But when the deal for the Gadsden Purchase was signed, the U.S. border moved south and split one Mexican town, the town of Nogales, in two. For almost 100 years, folks in Nogales hardly seemed to notice the border at all. Locals passed back and forth freely to do business and visit friends and family on either side. Then, in the late 20th century, tensions over illegal immigration and drug smuggling began to mount. The casual crossings that had been a way of life here came to seem suspect. In the 1990s, a new sheet metal fence brought them to an end. In 2011, the U.S. government began replacing the fence with an open pole barrier so they could see what was happening on the other side, at a cost of more than $4 million a mile. Now, Customs and Border Patrol officers work to make sure no one breaches the new fence, while security cameras keep watch 24/7. But the biggest threat may be what the officers and cameras can't see: tunnels dug underneath the new fence. One was even discovered leading right under a street on the U.S. side. Cars with holes in their floors would simply park over a trapdoor, upload their cargo of drugs, and then drive away. Today, millions of dollars of legal goods pass through the Nogales border crossing each year. The trick for customs officials is to try and pinpoint vehicles that may be carrying contraband or illegal aliens. And the vigilance doesn't end in Nogales. North, in Phoenix and across Arizona, local, state, and federal authorities spend millions of dollars to watch out for smugglers that have come across the U.S.-Mexican border. Once they identify a suspect, the wheels of justice begin to turn. Starting with a ritual any fan of TV cop shows knows all about: reading the suspect his or her rights. A practice that got its start right here in Arizona back in 1963 and was handed down in the case of an Arizona native named Ernesto Miranda, after the license number of his truck was linked to a robbery and rape, crimes to which he confessed. At his trial, here at Phoenix's Maricopa County Courthouse, that confession earned him a sentence of 30 years. But his lawyer argued that he should have been told about his rights before being interrogated by police. 3 years later, the Supreme Court agreed and ordered Miranda back for a new trial. Policemen on TV and in real life have been reading suspects their Miranda warning ever since. But not even a Supreme Court victory could earn Miranda an acquittal in his second trial, or keep him from being sent back to prison for up to 30 years. Today, he might have served at least a part of that time here in Phoenix instead, in one of the nation's most notorious jails, in the custody of one of modern America's most controversial lawmen. Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Arpaio's bare-bones lockup got its start in 1993 when he was pressured to grant early releases to inmates in his overcrowded jails. Arpaio, who likes to call himself America's toughest sheriff, had promised voters he'd never comply. So instead of releasing his prisoners, he pitched these military surplus tents in an empty lot and moved the prisoners here. Human rights activists have been complaining about his infamous tent city ever since. They claim life here is inherently inhumane, especially in Arizona's hot summers. And many complain that Arpaio, who once compared his own tent jail to a concentration camp, doesn't care. He wants it to be the convicts' worst nightmare, so they'll do their best to keep from coming back. And to make sure they don't try to leave too early, Arpaio forces them to wear classic striped prison uniforms, accessorized with pink underwear, to make them easy to spot if they try to escape. Their distinctive stripes also help them stand out along the shoulders of the state's highways, where Arpaio has introduced another innovation with a controversial past: chain gangs. He puts his female convicts in the gangs too, sending them out in the blazing sun to pick up litter and cut down weeds, pushing flesh and blood to the limit. Here in Arizona, temperatures can top 100 degrees for more than 30 days straight. Not the easiest place to be working in a chain gang. But this dry, baking desert is perfect for planes. This is the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group outside Tucson. Over 4,400 retired aircraft line the desert here in a place they call the Boneyard. But don't let the name fool you. Most of these planes didn't come here to die. They came to bask in the Arizona sun and stay well preserved in a dry heat guaranteed to keep corrosion at bay, standing safely on soil so dry and hard it makes concrete unnecessary, while waiting to be restored and returned to service. But some will just be cannibalized for parts and simply forgotten. Many will spend the rest of their days here, joining the millions of other retirees who call Arizona home, including the 37,000 who live here in a sprawling planned community near Phoenix called Sun City. Today it looks a lot like other sleepy senior developments, but when it opened in 1960, Sun City introduced Americans to a radical new approach to growing old. An approach dreamed up by a visionary developer named Del Webb. At 63, Webb was already a wealthy businessman and co-owner of the New York Yankees. He would go on to even greater fame and fortune as the owner of a string of Las Vegas casinos. But Sun City was the project that made his name. He imagined it as a vibrant but safe, all-inclusive village where thousands of residents could live out their golden years in style. Not as seniors, but as active adults. In one-story houses that were easy to navigate, on streets coiled around neighborhood centers to keep them conveniently close, where grandkids could visit but couldn't move in. No project like it had ever been attempted on such a vast scale, and even Webb had doubts that it would work. But in 1959, he broke ground on its first phase, a shopping center, golf course, community center, and 5 model homes. To drum up publicity, Webb held a contest to pick a name for his new community, and legend has it that he personally chose Sun City as the winning entry. At his January 1st, 1960 opening, 100,000 people showed up to see what Webb was up to. He sold them 237 of his still unbuilt homes before the weekend was over. He would sell almost 2,000 more by the end of the year. By then, Webb's doubts were over. Today, Sun City has over 26,000 houses and a median age of 73.4, just as Del Webb imagined. Though not all of these active adults live here year-round, many are retired Northerners who migrate to Arizona every winter to get away from the snow. Arriving in herds of RVs, they leave parked in special lots until they're ready to head back home in the spring. More than 400,000 snowbirds migrate to Arizona each year, more than even Sun City could ever handle. Fortunately, the state offers them plenty of other places to roost while they're here, and plenty of reasons to come back to the colorful, adventurous, historic, futuristic, fascinating state of Arizona.